Number 1. Mad honey. Picture a Roman column marching through the mountains near the Black Sea coast. The soldiers are tired, hungry, and far from home. Along the trail, they find combs of golden honey, seemingly left behind. They eat. Within the hour, the strongest legionaries in the ancient world are staggering, vomiting, and collapsing into the dirt, unable to lift a shield. This was no accident. It was a trap, and the weapon was honey. The poison is a group of compounds called grayanotoxins. They come from plants in the rhododendron family, especially the pontic rhododendron that blankets the hills above the Black Sea. When bees feed on the nectar of these flowers, they carry the toxin straight into the honey. The result is called deli or mad honey, and beekeepers on the Turkish coast still produce it today. Chemically, grayanotoxins jam the tiny sodium channels that let your nerves fire and reset. The channels stick open. Nerves and muscles can no longer switch off, and the body loses control. The symptoms are dramatic. Victims feel dizziness, weakness, and a flood of saliva. Then come vomiting, plunging blood pressure, and a dangerously slow heartbeat. The first written account comes from the Greek soldier and historian Xenophon. Around 401 BC, his army of 10,000 ate honeycombs near the city of Trapezus. He described men behaving as if drunk or mad, sprawled on the ground, recovering only after about a day. The truly decisive moment came in 65 BC. The Roman general Pompey the Great was chasing King Mithridates VI of Pontus. A local tribe called the Heptacometes knew the land and knew the honey. According to the geographer Strabo, they placed toxic combs directly in the path of the advancing Romans. The soldiers ate, collapsed, and were then cut down where they lay. Ancient sources put the losses at around 3 maniples, roughly 1,000 men, destroyed without a proper battle. This is one of the earliest recorded times a food became a weapon that beat a professional army. Even Pliny the Elder wrote of the maddening honey of Pontus in his Natural History. Modern doctors still treat mad honey disease, usually from imported honey, with atropine and fluids. In tiny amounts, the same toxin has been sold as a folk stimulant and even an aphrodisiac. Much of the world's mad honey now comes from Nepal, where Gurung honey hunters scale cliffs to gather it from Apis laboriosa, the giant Himalayan bee. Of the many grayanotoxins, the variant labeled grayanotoxin 1 is the most potent, and the damp microclimate of the Black Sea packs its rhododendrons together so densely that its honey is uniquely dangerous. It all depends on the dose. And if a jar of honey could break a legion, what could a poison do to an entire city? Number 2. Hellebore at the siege of Kirrha. To answer that, we travel back further, to a war fought over the most sacred place in the Greek world. Around 595 BC, a conflict broke out that we call the First Sacred War. At its center stood Delphi, home of the famous oracle. Below the sanctuary sat the city of Kirrha, which controlled the plain and, crucially, taxed the pilgrims traveling up to consult the oracle. A powerful alliance of Greek states, the Amphictyonic League, decided to punish Kirrha and laid siege to it. The siege dragged on. Then came a stratagem that would echo through military history. Ancient sources disagree on who devised it, crediting the Athenian lawgiver Solon, a physician named Nebros, or the tyrant Cleisthenes of Citione. The plan was the same in every version. The besiegers found the pipe or channel carrying water from the Pleistos River into the city. They dammed it, cutting off Kirrha's supply. Into that water, they packed enormous quantities of hellebore root, a violent purgative known to every Greek doctor. Both the black hellebore of the Christmas rose and the so-called white hellebore, which is actually the plant veratrum album, were used in antiquity, and both could kill outright in quantity. Then they released the flow again. The thirsty defenders drank deeply, and the city was seized by uncontrollable diarrhea and vomiting. Too weak to stand, let alone hold the walls, the garrison could not resist the final assault. Kirrha fell and was destroyed around 585 BC. This is frequently called the earliest recorded act of chemical or biological warfare through a water supply. Hellebore was the perfect choice. Its roots contain glycosides that attack the heart and gut, yet Greek medicine used the plant constantly to purge patients and treat madness. It was cheap and everywhere. After the victory, the conquered plain was declared sacred to Apollo and left forever uncultivated, which conveniently secured the pilgrim revenue for Delphi itself. There is a mainstream view that takes the poisoning at face value. There is a more skeptical view too, because the surviving sources are late and contradictory, and some historians suspect the whole story is a moral legend about the dangers of impiety. Whatever the truth, the tactic entered the military tradition. The Roman writer Frontinus later cataloged attacks on water supplies as legitimate ruses of war. And notice who is named in the tradition. Solon, one of the 7 sages of Greece, celebrated for wisdom and justice, is tied directly to an act of chemical warfare. The war also reshaped the region, helping to reorganize the Pythian Games around 582 BC. From poisoning a whole city, the story of poison now turns intimate and far harder to detect. Number 3. Aqua Tofana. Move forward now to the crowded cities of 17th century Italy, to Palermo, Naples, and Rome. Here a poison circulated that left almost no trace. It was clear, tasteless, and could be slipped into food or wine without the faintest warning. It was called Aqua Tofana, named for the woman said to have made it, Giulia Tofana, who was active until around the 1650s. The chief ingredient was arsenic, in the form of arsenic trioxide, likely combined with lead and perhaps a little belladonna. What made it so dangerous was not just the chemistry, but the disguise. It was sold in small glass vials presented as cosmetics, or as a devotional item labeled the Manna of St. Nicholas of Bari. A bottle on a lady's dressing table drew no suspicion at all. The method was patient. A few drops added to a husband's food each day produced symptoms that looked exactly like a natural wasting illness. First, a victim felt like he had a cold. Then came weakness and stomach upset. Then vomiting and dehydration. The final dose finished the work, and a physician would record death from disease. The primary customers, according to the legend, were women trapped in violent or loveless marriages at a time when divorce simply did not exist. The numbers attached to Tofana are impossible to verify, but tradition credits her network with up to 600 deaths across decades. She is said to have worked with her daughter, Girolama Spara, and a ring of accomplices. Around 1659, the operation was exposed, reportedly after a client confessed. Tofana was arrested, tortured, and executed. Authorities in the Papal States launched investigations into so-called poison widows. The affair had a consequence far larger than any single crime. Slow arsenic poisoning was nearly impossible to prove, and that gap drove the search for a chemical test. It arrived in 1836, when the chemist James Marsh devised a sensitive method to detect even tiny amounts of arsenic in body tissue. The Marsh test helped close the door on the perfect poison. Arsenic had earned a grim nickname, inheritance powder, for its use in clearing away inconvenient relatives. The Tofana panic also fed the later affair of the poisons in France. Poison had moved from the battlefield and the palace into ordinary homes, and the state was forced to build a science to catch it. Yet, the state had once employed a master poisoner of its own. Number 4. Locusta of Gaul. That poisoner worked at the very summit of Roman power. Her name was Locusta, a woman from Gaul who became the most feared professional poisoner in 1st century Rome. She is named directly by the historians Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio, always in connection with the deaths of the powerful. Around 54 AD, the Empress Agrippina the Younger wanted her husband gone. Her husband was the Emperor Claudius. The favorite account holds that Agrippina turned to Locusta, and that Claudius was killed by a dish of poisoned mushrooms, perhaps reinforced by a second dose when the first worked too slowly. The result changed the empire. With Claudius dead, the path to the throne opened for Agrippina's son, a boy of 16 named Nero. Locusta's work was not finished. In 55 AD, Nero himself is said to have used her against Britannicus, Claudius's own son and a rival for the throne. The first dose was too weak. According to Tacitus, Nero flew into a rage and threatened Locusta, who then brewed a fast and violent poison, testing it first on animals until she was sure. At a banquet, Britannicus took a drink, collapsed, and died in front of the assembled guests. Nero calmly explained it away as an epileptic fit. Rather than punish her, Nero rewarded Locusta with estates and even sent her students to learn the craft. In effect, she ran a school of poisoning under imperial protection, an astonishing state endorsement of murder. Her toolkit likely included aconite, hemlock, arsenic, and toxic fungi, all available in the Roman world. Her career ended only after Nero fell. The new Emperor Galba had her executed around 69 AD. Locusta was not the beginning of Rome's fear of poison. The historian Livy records mass poisoning trials as far back as 331 BC. In 81 BC, the dictator Sulla passed the Lex Cornelia, a law that criminalized poisoning and the trade in poisons. Agrippina herself had long been suspected of removing rivals to advance her son, and Suetonius treats Nero's easy reliance on Locusta as evidence of a cold cruelty that was present from the very start of his reign. But Locusta shows something darker. Here poison was not a private crime. It was an instrument of dynastic succession, wielded at the top of the state to decide who would rule an empire. Modern toxicologists note how plausible the mushroom story is, precisely because the poison she likely used was slow, deniable, and entirely natural. Number 5. Ergot, or St. Anthony's fire. Not every poison that changed history was chosen by anyone. Some arrived silently, growing in the fields that fed entire nations. Ergot is a fungus, Claviceps purpurea, that infects rye and other grains. It replaces the healthy kernel with a hard, dark growth called a sclerotium, packed with powerful chemicals. Those chemicals are the ergot alkaloids, including ergotamine and ergonovine. They are cousins of lysergic acid, the molecule at the heart of LSD. When people ate bread made from infected rye, they suffered ergotism, and it took two terrible forms. One was convulsive, bringing seizures, hallucinations, and a crawling sensation on the skin. The other was gangrenous. The alkaloids clamped down on blood vessels, choking off circulation to the hands and feet until the flesh burned, blackened, and died. Medieval Europeans called it St. Anthony's fire, the holy fire, Ignis Sacer. Around 1095, the Order of St. Anthony was founded to care for the afflicted, and sufferers sometimes recovered simply because the monastery bread was made from uncontaminated grain. The scale could be catastrophic. An outbreak in southern France in 944 to 945 AD is said to have killed tens of thousands of people. Epidemics returned again and again, always tracking wet growing seasons that let the fungus thrive on rye, which happened to be the staple grain of the poor. The story took a strange turn in the 20th century. In 1938, the chemist Albert Hofmann, working with Ergot at the Sandoz Laboratories, synthesized LSD. Decades later, in 1976, the scholar Linda Caporel proposed that convulsive ergotism might explain the Salem witch trials. The accusers had reported convulsions, crawling skin, and visions, all consistent with ergot poisoning. The idea was gripping, but it was challenged. The psychologist Nicholas Spanos argued that social and psychological pressures explained Salem far better than any fungus. Ergot was never only a curse. Midwives had long used it to induce labor and stop bleeding after childbirth. Modern medicine still draws from it, with ergotamine for migraines and bromocriptine for Parkinson's disease. Even in 1951, a mass poisoning in the French town of Pont-Saint-Esprit was blamed by many on ergot, though the cause remains disputed. Better grain cleaning finally ended the great epidemics. But if a fungus in the food could poison a whole region by accident, other poisons were feared so deeply that people tried to outlaw the plant itself. Number 6. Aconite, the queen of poisons. Few plants have earned as many sinister names. Aconite comes from the genus Aconitum, and its most famous species are monkshood and wolfsbane. Its toxin, aconitine, is one of the fastest and most reliable killers in the plant kingdom. Like granotoxin, it forces sodium channels open, but the effect on the heart is devastating, throwing it into fatal arrhythmia. The danger is extreme. Even handling the sap or the root can cause tingling and numbness through the skin. Swallowing just a few milligrams can kill. Victims feel burning in the mouth, then numbness, then vomiting, then the heart stumbles into chaos and stops. The plant's folk names tell the story on their own. Wolfsbane, leopard's bane, women's bane, the devil's helmet, for its hooded blue flowers. The Greeks wove aconite into myth. They said it grew from the saliva of Cerberus, the hound of the underworld, and that the sorceress Medea prepared it to poison the hero Theseus. In the real world, Greeks and Romans used it for executions, for murder, and to smear on bait for wolves and other predators. Its reputation grew so alarming that the Emperor Trajan reportedly banned the growing of aconite in private gardens. Under the Lex Cornelia, dealing in such poisons was a capital crime. Ancient writers like Theophrastus and Dioscorides carefully documented its toxicity. Aconitine is so potent that a dose of just a few milligrams can be fatal, and because it breaks down quickly in the body, it long escaped detection entirely, leaving no clear trace for investigators to find. Across the Aegean and into Asia, warriors and hunters smeared aconite on arrows and spears. In China, healers took the opposite approach, carefully processing aconite root, called fuzi, into a controlled heart stimulant. That contrast reveals the plant's central problem. The gap between a helpful dose and a lethal one is razor thin. Because aconitine could imitate a natural cardiac death and was so hard to detect, it became a favorite for quiet, deniable killing. This is not only ancient history. In 2009, a London woman named Lakhvir Singh murdered a former lover by lacing a curry with aconite, a case the press called the curry killer. There is still no specific antidote. Doctors can only support the heart and hope. The plant grows freely in temperate mountain meadows, which made it easy to gather in every age, and its beautiful hooded flowers long tempted gardeners who did not understand what they were growing. Medieval witch lore even placed it in so-called flying ointments. Yet not all Roman poison was chosen by an assassin. Some of it was hiding in the wine itself. Number 7. Lead, or the sugar of lead. This poison killed slowly, invisibly, and without any murderer at all. Lead poisoning, known as plumism, builds up in the bones and attacks the nervous system over years. What makes the Roman case so strange is that the Romans added lead to their food on purpose, because they liked the taste. When lead reacts with the acids in wine, it forms lead acetate, a compound so sweet it was called the sugar of lead. Romans would boil down grape must, the fresh-pressed juice, in lead or lead-lined pots to make a syrup called sapa, or defrutum. This syrup sweetened and preserved their wine. The agricultural writer Columella specifically recommended lead vessels because they improved the flavor over bronze. Wealthy Romans drank enormous quantities of wine treated this way, and cooked in lead-lined cookware besides. On top of that came the plumbing. The very word plumbing comes from the Latin plumbum, meaning lead, because Roman pipes were made of it. That added a constant low dose of lead to daily life. The symptoms of chronic exposure are grim: abdominal pain, anemia, gout, infertility, and a slow decline of the mind that can look like madness. In 1965, the scholar S.C. Gilfillan argued that lead poisoning of the Roman aristocracy helped bring down the empire. In 1983, the geochemist Jerome Nuriagu detailed the case in a full book on lead poisoning in antiquity. Analyses of Roman skeletons do show elevated lead levels, though how to interpret them is debated. In 2014, a study led by Hugo Delisle found that tap water flowing through Roman lead pipes carried up to 100-fold more lead than the local spring water, even if the total was probably below the level of acute harm. Critics push back hard. Rome's population was huge, and exposure would have been very uneven, so blaming the fall of an empire on a single poison is far too simple. Still, the pattern fits. The elite suffered from what was called Saturnine gout, exactly what chronic lead exposure produces. Estimates of how much lead a Roman aristocrat swallowed from sweetened wine alone run well above any modern safety limit, and that is before adding food cooked in lead pots and water carried in lead pipes. The Greeks Dioscorides and Nicander had already warned that lead compounds caused illness, yet the Romans kept adding it, blind to the slow accumulation. It is poison by ignorance, woven into everyday food technology. And sometimes a single meal really did change an empire. Number 8. The death cap mushroom. This is the deadliest mushroom on Earth, responsible for most fatal mushroom poisonings worldwide. Its scientific name is Amanita phalloides, and it looks utterly ordinary, which is exactly what makes it so dangerous. Its poisons are the amatoxins, especially alpha-amanitin, which shut down an enzyme called RNA polymerase II and halt the body's ability to build proteins. The most sinister thing about the death cap is its timing. Symptoms do not appear for 6 to 12 hours. Then comes a false recovery, where the victim seems to improve and even feels well. Behind that calm, the liver and kidneys are failing. By the time the real crisis hits, it is often too late. A single cap holds enough toxin to kill an adult, and there is no reliable antidote. Now, recall the death of the Emperor Claudius in 54 AD. His favorite food was mushrooms. The Roman historians Tacitus, Suetonius, and Cassius Dio all report that Agrippina poisoned him, likely with help from Locusta. Here the pieces fit together with chilling precision. A Roman delicacy was Caesar's mushroom, Amanita caesarea, which is edible and prized. Slipping a death cap into that dish would be almost undetectable. Some accounts add that when Claudius lingered, his doctor, a man named Xenophon, finished him with a poisoned feather meant to make him vomit. Claudius died, and Nero rose. The death cap kept altering history long after Rome. It may have killed Pope Clement VII in 1534. The death of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI in 1740 has been linked to death cap poisoning, and that death triggered the War of the Austrian Succession. The writer Voltaire remarked that this plate of mushrooms changed the destiny of Europe. The mushrooms' delayed and deniable action made it ideal for covert murder, but it kills far more people by simple mistake. Modern treatment uses silibinin, drawn from milk thistle, along with penicillin and, in the worst cases, a liver transplant. The death cap has spread across the globe, carried on the roots of imported trees. Cooking does nothing because the amatoxins survive heat. Drying and freezing leave them intact as well, which is why every field guide insists there is no safe way to prepare a mushroom you cannot positively identify. No simple home test can tell it apart from an edible mushroom. Again and again, a wild fungus rewrote the line of succession. Yet the most famous poison death of all was ordered not by a court, but handed down by one. Number 9. Hemlock. Some poisons are hidden in secret. This one was administered in the open by the authority of a city, and it created one of history's greatest martyrs. Poison hemlock, Conium maculatum, is a tall plant of the carrot family, common across Europe and the Mediterranean. Its toxin is conin, an alkaloid that blocks the signals between nerves and muscles, causing a slow, creeping paralysis that climbs up the body. Death comes when the muscles of breathing fail, and the terrible detail is that the victim often stays conscious and clear-minded to the end. The plant is easy to mistake for wild carrot or parsley, though its hollow stem carries distinctive purple blotches. Its most famous victim needs no introduction. In 399 BC, the philosopher Socrates was executed in Athens with a draft of hemlock. Socrates had been condemned for impiety and for corrupting the young men of the city. His student Plato recorded the death in the dialogue Phaedo. In that account, Socrates drinks calmly, walks until his legs grow heavy, then lies down as the numbness spreads upward from his feet toward his heart. Some scholars suspect the execution mixture contained other agents alongside hemlock to guarantee death. In classical Athens, hemlock was an accepted method of state execution, considered relatively humane for its time. Ancient physicians such as Dioscorides described its paralytic effects and its limited use as a sedative. The chemistry has its own milestone. In 1886, conin became the first plant alkaloid ever to be synthesized in a laboratory, a landmark in the science of natural products because its structure is so simple. The Athenian practice of the hemlock cup shaped Western ideas about civic execution for centuries, but the deepest effect was philosophical. The calm death of Socrates, recorded by both Plato and Xenophon, became the founding story of the thinker who defies the state and dies rather than betray his principles. There is no antidote to hemlock even now, only mechanical breathing until the toxin clears. The plant still poisons foragers and livestock who mistake it for something safe. Its musty, mouse-like smell is a warning that is easy to ignore. One plant, through one death, earned an outsized place in the history of human thought. And the final poison on our list did something even larger. It helped build the empire that followed the Greek world. Number 10. Snake venom and the asp. Our last poison closes the door on an entire age. In 30 BC, Cleopatra VII, the last active ruler of Ptolemaic Egypt, died after her forces were crushed by the Roman leader Octavian. The traditional story, passed down by Plutarch and later writers, is that she died from the bite of an asp, most likely an Egyptian cobra. Strictly speaking, snake venom is not an ingested poison. It is delivered by envenomation, a bite, but it sits firmly in the lore of poison, and its effects are just as deadly. Egyptian cobra venom is a neurotoxin. It causes paralysis, and finally, respiratory failure, though the death is painful and not always quick. Plutarch himself admitted that no one truly knew how she died. He noted only that 2 tiny marks were found on her arm. That uncertainty has never gone away. An alternative account says Cleopatra used a poisoned comb, a hairpin, or a small hidden vial of toxin, rather than a snake at all. The cobra carried immense symbolism, because the rearing uraeus serpent was a royal Egyptian emblem of sovereignty worn on the crown of the pharaohs. Ancient writers claimed Cleopatra had experimented with poisons on condemned prisoners, searching for the least painful way to die. Modern toxicologists raise a sharp objection. A single cobra bite would be too slow and too uncertain to reliably kill 3 people, and the tradition says Cleopatra died alongside 2 loyal servants. The investigator Pat Brown and others have gone further, suggesting she was murdered on Octavian's orders and that the noble suicide was clever propaganda. What is certain is the consequence. Her death ended the Ptolemaic dynasty and 3 centuries of Greek rule over Egypt. Egypt became the personal province of the Roman emperor, and its vast grain wealth would underwrite Roman power for generations. Her death marks the conventional end of the Hellenistic age and the rise of Octavian as the Emperor Augustus. Octavian is said to have paraded an image of Cleopatra with a snake coiled on her arm during his triumph in Rome, sealing the legend forever. Whether by asp or by vial, her poisoning transferred the richest kingdom of the ancient Mediterranean into Roman hands. 10 poisons, 10 turning points. But what do they share beneath the stories? Look across all 10, and the patterns leap out. The first is the oldest rule in toxicology, later captured by the physician Paracelsus. The dose makes the poison. Many of these killers were also medicines at lower doses. Hellebore purged the sick. Ergot stopped childbirth bleeding. Aconite steadied the heart. Hemlock calmed the anxious. The line between remedy and ruin was always a matter of quantity. The second thread is deniability. The most effective poisons produced deaths that looked natural. The death cap mimicked disease. Arsenic mimicked a wasting illness. Aconite mimicked a heart attack. This is why poison so often decided successions and settled scores when an open killing was impossible. The third thread is disguise. Poison hid inside the everyday, in a jar of honey, a cup of wine, a plate of mushrooms, a bottle of cosmetics. It exploited trust. The fourth thread is access. Almost none of these poisons required a laboratory. They grew in fields and meadows, or came from common metals. A few grams could kill an emperor. That gave poison a unique quality. It was the weapon of the physically weaker party, the tool that let a servant, a wife, or a small mountain tribe topple someone far stronger. The Greeks had a single word for this doubled power, pharmakon, meaning both remedy and poison at once. It is no accident that women appear so often in these stories, from Tofana to Locusta to Agrippina, in a world where they were denied more direct forms of power. There is a chemistry to the pattern too. Some of these agents, like lead and arsenic, are cumulative metals that build up quietly over months and years. Others, like aconite and coniine, are plant alkaloids that strike within minutes. Some attack the nerves, some the heart, some the very machinery of the cell. And notice how poison lived on both sides of the law, used by the state for execution and warfare, and by private hands for murder, which is why so many of these episodes cluster around sieges and successions, the exact moments when power changes hands. The undetectable nature of the best poisons is precisely what forced humanity to invent a science to catch them. That struggle became a hidden arms race. For every poison, someone sought a shield. The most famous seeker was King Mithridates, the sixth of Pontus, the same enemy Pompey chased through the mad honey mountains. Mithridates was so terrified of being poisoned that he studied toxins obsessively and, according to legend, dosed himself daily with small, sublethal amounts to build up tolerance. We still call that practice Mithridatism. The story has a dark irony. When he was finally defeated around 63 BC, he tried to kill himself with poison and found it no longer worked. He had to order a soldier to run him through. Mithridates was said to have devised a universal antidote, the Mithridatium, blending dozens of ingredients into one preparation. Nero's physician Andromachus later expanded it into a famous compound called theriac, which remained a prestige medicine in Europe into the 18th century. Around it grew a whole theater of protection. Royal food tasters. Cups supposedly carved from unicorn horn. Bezoar stones taken from animal stomachs, believed to neutralize any poison. Knowledge advanced alongside the superstition. Around 70 AD, Dioscorides compiled De Materia Medica, cataloging poisons and their remedies. The poet Nicander wrote whole works, the Theriaca and Alexipharmaca, on venomous bites and antidotes. On the darker side, the craft was professionalized, as Locusta's imperial school of poisoning showed. The most reliable real defense was crude but effective, forcing the victim to vomit or purge before the poison took hold. Theriac itself was a marvel of complexity, sometimes containing more than 60 ingredients, including viper flesh, and it was prepared in public ceremonies to guarantee that no cheaper substitute had been slipped in. Law became a weapon too. The Lex Cornelia against poisoners shaped Roman politics, and fear of beneficium, secret poisoning, ran through the empire. Centuries later, Renaissance courts revived tasters and antidote lore. The true turning point was the slow shift from magic to chemistry. Paracelsus formalized the dose-response principle in the 16th century. In the early 19th century, Mathieu Orfila founded modern toxicology as a real science. The Marsh test closed the arsenic loophole in 1836. Anti-venom for snakebite arrived only in the 1890s, through the work of Albert Calmet. Yet, even now, some of these ancient stories refuse to be solved. For all our science, doubt clings to nearly every case. Did the poisoning of Kirrha actually happen? The sources are late and they contradict each other, and the whole episode may be a moral legend dressed as history. How much of the Aqua Tofana story is documented fact, and how much is embellishment layered on over centuries? We genuinely do not know the real number of her victims. Was the Emperor Claudius truly poisoned, or did an old, unwell man simply die and get folded into a convenient murder story? Even if he was poisoned, we cannot be sure which mushroom did it, or whether a second dose was really needed. The Roman lead debate is far from settled. Skeletons show elevated lead, but scholars argue over whether that reflects a leaded diet or contamination from the burial itself, and whether the effect on the empire was large or trivial. Did Ergot actually drive the Salem witch panic? Linda Caporel made the case, but Nicholas Spanos and others answered that human psychology and social pressure explain the events far better than any fungus. And the most famous death of all remains genuinely open. Did Cleopatra die by an asp, by a hidden vial, or at the hands of a murderer? Plutarch, our main source, openly confessed his uncertainty, and modern toxicology doubts a cobra could have killed 3 people so cleanly. The deeper problem is method. Diagnosing a death from a 2,000-year-old text is treacherous. Ancient historians love to moralize about poison, and a suspicious death was easy to blame on it. Distinguishing a deliberate poisoning from a natural epidemic is often impossible at this distance. Chemical residue analysis and new isotope and DNA techniques are reopening some of these cold cases, but they have limits too. A poison that breaks down quickly, like aconitine, may leave nothing to find even in a well-preserved body, while a metal like lead can seep into bones from the surrounding soil and fool the analysis in the other direction. Here, more than almost anywhere in history, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. What we can trace with confidence is how these ancient poisons still shape the modern world. The afterlife of these toxins is a story of transformation. Ergot, the fungus of medieval fire, gave us drugs for migraine and for childbirth, and its chemistry opened the door to the research history of LSD. Aconite, the queen of poisons, became a carefully controlled heart medicine in traditional practice. Hemlock's conine marked a milestone in chemistry as the first alkaloid ever synthesized, back in 1886. Snake venom, the killer of Cleopatra's legend, turned out to be a pharmacy in disguise. Research on pit viper venom led directly to captopril, a landmark drug for high blood pressure. Anti-venom programs, born in the 1890s, now save countless lives every year. The death cap gave up a treatment in silibinin, drawn from milk thistle. Even arsenic, the inheritance powder, was reborn as arsenic trioxide, a modern therapy for a form of leukemia, turning the classic murder weapon into a life-saving drug. The ergot alkaloids alone spun off an entire family of medicines, from bromocriptine for Parkinson's disease to compounds that shaped early neuroscience. Detection advanced just as far. The Marsh test in 1836 was only the beginning. Mathieu Orfila's foundational work in 1813 built toxicology into a courtroom science. Today, mass spectrometry can find a trace of poison that would have been utterly invisible to any Roman or medieval investigator. The era of the perfect, undetectable poison is essentially over. Public health tells the same story of turning knowledge against the poison. Lead, the sweet killer of Rome, was slowly stripped out of paint, pipes, and gasoline, one of the great victories of modern medicine, with blood-lead screening guarding children who will never know the danger the Romans lived with daily. Granotoxin from mad honey is now studied for its effects on the heart and on pain. Belladonna gave us atropine, an essential medicine, and, fittingly, an antidote to other poisons. The ancient idea of the pharmacon has been vindicated in full. Our medicines were born from our poisons, and toxicology itself grew directly out of centuries of fear. Return, finally, to the thread that runs through all 10 stories. Again and again, a tiny quantity of the right substance produced consequences out of all proportion to its size. A jar of honey broke a Roman column. A cup of water emptied a besieged city. A dish of mushrooms decided who would rule an empire. Poison was the great equalizer, letting the weak strike down the strong when no sword ever could. There is an intimacy to poison that the battlefield never had. It arrives in food, in drink, in a gift, from someone trusted. That is why it haunts the historical imagination so powerfully, and why the poisoner has always seemed more frightening than the open enemy. The true weapon in every case was knowledge. Knowledge of which plant, which dose, which disguise. The mountain tribe that knew its rhododendrons held more power over Pompey than any army. These substances sat on the knife edge of the pharmacon, remedy and ruin bound together in a single root or spore. What ancient poisoners grasped about the human body, long before there was any real science, is genuinely humbling. They understood, by patient and ruthless experiment, effects that chemistry would not explain for 2,000 years. And every poison, by threatening the powerful, forced a counter-response that pushed knowledge forward, from the food taster to the mass spectrometer. The same rhododendron that dropped Pompey's men now sits in a laboratory, its toxin studied for the heart. The same nightshade families that killed emperors now fill the shelves of every hospital pharmacy. Poison and cure were never truly separate things, only two readings of the same molecule. Much of it remains uncertain. We still argue over Cleopatra, over Claudius, over Salem, over Rome. History, it turns out, can turn on things too small to see. Chemistry working quietly behind the great visible events of kings and battles. Picture them one last time. The golden comb on the mountain trail. The clay cup in the Athenian cell. The cobra rising from a basket of figs. Each one a mirror of human ingenuity and human cruelty at once. The lasting lesson of these 10 poisons is simple and unsettling. Power does not always announce itself with armies. Sometimes it is silent, invisible, and small enough to hold in a single drop.